Hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can.
Excellent. Oh, here we go. We got
We,
like a whole lot of participants now.
yes, we do.
Good. Welcome, everyone. Sorry about a little bit of technical difficulties. Zoom threw a wrench at us, but we're really glad that you're here.
Oh, terrific.
Yeah. So everybody was waiting for me.
Oh, hi, everybody. But we made it. Well, great. Well, that's wonderful. So, I mean, we're a couple minutes past. So, Brad, I just want to thank you again. And, for those of you who, are new to this forum, thank you for being brave and joining us. And for those who don't know, Brad Snyder is the executive director of the Dion Initiative for Child Wellbeing and Bullying Prevention. He's also the chair of the Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences Consortium and a commissioner on the Governor's Council on Child Safety and Family Empowerment. And we're really excited that he's joining us today to speak to the community. Last month, we were trying to actually figure out how long ago it was, and we determined it was just exactly about a month ago. Brad and Tom were both with us presenting to our community, and the topic then was home climate during COVID-19. And during that time, he touched a little bit upon cyberbullying, and there was just a great sort of response from our community with a great interest in learning a bit more about cyberbullying during this time where everyone is, our kids are on devices socially and for school and all of that. And so just really thankful and grateful to both Tom and Brad for being here today to answer the community's, calls for more on this important topic. So thank you, Brad, and thank you everyone who is participating. And there will be opportunity in the Q&A box to drop in any questions. And Brad, I think will you probably wait until the end of your presentation to try to answer some of those?
Well, actually, well, thank you, Jessica. And I just wanted to let everybody know, Tom is monitoring the Q&A and the chat. And, if it's something that if it's important to what we're talking about at the moment, we're going to try to answer all those questions as they come up. So if you think of something and it's something that we're addressing right then, feel free to answer it in the Q&A. You can also use the chat. And then, like I said, we're going to be monitoring that and trying to address these as we go along. We want these to be as valuable to the people attending as possible.
Perfect. Thank you.
So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into our presentation today. And the first place we're going to start really is answering this question about what is cyberbullying? And unfortunately, we don't all disagree. We don't all agree on what cyberbullying is. There isn't one set definition. We know that it's bullying that occurs over a digital device. And we know it's when students tease, threaten, or spread rumors about a victim. But otherwise, sometimes the definitions change. We are using, for the statistics that we're going to talk about today, the CDC's definition of it. And the CDC decided when they talk to children about bullying that what they say is, it's bullying, but with digital devices. And then they let the kids decide what bullying is when they answer their questions. And that's a definition that we're going to use today too. So there are many, many different types of cyberbullying that all fit under that umbrella. And I want to share some of them with you because I think that some of them are obvious, but others are emerging as newer ways that people are being intimidated and bullying online. So I think we're most familiar with this posting a hurtful text or posting hurtful media. So you write an email or you make a tweet or you post to Instagram or Snapchat, either something that's hurtful about the victim or a video or a image that's meant to be embarrassing. We're pretty much used to that one. We're also used to the one where we're seeing people threatening another person. So they're using these digital devices and these different services to really threaten to harm somebody, or as we've seen in some very highly publicized instances, people using social media to encourage another person to harm themselves. And that fits under this umbrella that we talk about when we talk about cyberbullying. Another more sophisticated technique that we're seeing is when people make fake profiles or fake websites and pretend to be the victim and say or do harmful things in the voice of the victim, hoping that other people will look negatively on the victim for what they're doing, what somebody else is doing in their name through these different social media sites. And most recently, we're seeing what is known as doxing. Doxing is when, if you are disagreeing with somebody online, the person that you're disagreeing with finds as much personal information about you as they can and starts to share it widely. So let's say that you're having an argument about who is the best Avenger from the Marvel movie, and you disagree with somebody. That person might respond by saying, hey, Brad Snyder disagrees with me, and he lives at this address, and this is like who his friends are, and this is his phone number, and if you disagree with him, here's all the ways that you can get to him. And that can be incredibly frightening because it looks like this very extreme invasion of privacy. And it does, if people are interested, gives them a very easy way to contact and to harass the victim. And that's known as doxing. So really quickly here, and we're going to try something new for these webinars. I want to ask you, which do you think is worse, in-person bullying or cyberbullying? We're going to put up that poll right now for you to answer. Which do you think is worse, cyberbullying or in-person bullying? So go ahead and vote if you can. We're going to let that just sit up there for just a moment. Excellent. All right, let's take a look at those results that everybody shared here when they polled. And indeed, about 80% of the people in this webinar said that cyberbullying is worse. And that actually, that shows me that the people who are participating in this webinar are absolutely paying attention to the news, and they're absolutely paying attention to the media, but that's wrong. It turns out that more children experience in-person bullying than do cyberbullying, and that they are more afraid of it than people who than they are of cyberbullying. So in-person bullying is actually more frightening to our children, and they experience it at far greater levels. So I saw somebody's hand go up there. Tom, are you addressing that?
I don't have any questions.
Oh, okay. If you can, I saw somebody raise their hand. If you can type your question in the Q&A, then we'll absolutely try to address it. But that is really surprising to us, for most people, that cyberbullying is worse. Now, I have a theory about why adults think it's worse. Well, first of all, it definitely gets more media coverage than does everything else, than other kinds of bullying. And so that's one of the reasons why we tend to think it's worse. But I think there's another reason. And the other reason is because cyberbullying happens in this world that we're less comfortable with, that we're a little more afraid of. At the end of the day, as people that care about kids, we know that if push comes to shove, we know how to protect a victim from bullying. We would just surround them. We would keep them away from the bully. We would physically prevent bullying happening to them. But in the cyber world, where we can't hug our kids, we can't put armor on them, we can't surround them, that seems more frightening to us. And indeed, we've been chasing cyberbullying for the last decade. Anytime we think we get our hands around the problem in one medium, so we figured out how to work with Facebook to stop cyberbullying, the kids leave Facebook. And we figure out how to work with Snapchat to stop the cyberbullying, and kids leave Snapchat. And we're figuring out how to work with TikTok. And so that keeps going. So I think that's one of the reasons why were more afraid of cyberbullying even than in-person bullying, but more kids experience it. Now, I've got some good news about that. By the way, here are the averages for Arizona. About 26% of students in Arizona experience in-person bullying in the last year, and about 18 to 20% experience cyberbullying. So the good news, which is something that you can take away from this, which I think is possibly a room for good news, is that while we are terribly afraid of cyberbullying, it turns out that virtually every incident of cyberbullying is linked to in-person bullying. This has been studied, and the data is, it's wonderful at some level. I think it's quite revolutionary. It's being studied in the best ways possible. And this is what they discovered. And of course, it starts to make sense, especially if you can talk to children about cyberbullying. And the best way that I can think about this is, if you think about if you've ever purchased something on Amazon, and if you've ever read the review of something that you've purchased on Amazon after you've purchased it, there's a good chance that somebody in that review of the product that you bought and you like thinks that you're a moron for having purchased that product, right? And but you don't really care, because because that product or that person that thinks you're a moron for purchasing the product on Amazon, you don't know them. You're not going to have to encounter them at work or in your community. And this is what children tell us about cyberbullying. It's not that some anonymous person said something mean to them. That happens all the time on the internet. And unfortunately, our children experience that, very often when they're playing online games or when they're going online. That's not what bothers them. And that is not what they consider to be cyberbullying. What bothers them is when something is hurtful is said about them or posted to them, and then their friends see it. The people at their school see it. So even though, and thank you for the question about the permanence of cyberbullying, we will talk about that too. Despite the fact that that what you do online can live for a very long time beyond the actual incident, what we now believe is, if the people in person in your community don't care about the cyberbullying, or, and we're going to touch on this in a little bit, if those people, the bystanders, if they do not engage, or even if they become upstanders and tell the victim of cyberbullying that what was said about them or posted about them was wrong, if the people in our community do not respond to the cyberbullying, it goes away. Even though the post itself is permanent and might have been hurtful at that moment, what our kids say is that it won't matter if the people in person don't look at them differently or treat them differently because of it. But I'm going to address that a couple more times. I think that we all are aware of the consequences of cyberbullying, but I do want to go over what we know scientifically about the consequences of cyberbullying, as opposed to what we don't know, or some of the myths about cyberbullying. So we do know, for example, that cyberbullying can result in decreased academic performance for those kids who are cyberbullied. And the reason why we see this giant shift in the academic performance has everything to do with what I just mentioned. All of the cyberbullying, virtually all of the cyberbullying that our kids are experiencing, is happening because of things that are happening at school. So because of that, their attitudes and their feelings towards school change because of that cyberbullying. It is the case that victims of bullying, and cyberbullying in particular, are more likely to experience depression and mental health issues clear into adulthood than those who are. And we now have some very good longitudinal studies that track victims of bullying 20, 30 years. And it is the case that victims of bullying and cyberbullying do experience higher levels of depression and mental health issues. I wanted to talk about suicide here a little bit to kind of tease out some of the myths of cyberbullying and suicide behavior, as well as to give you the hard facts of it, because there is a risk of increased suicidal behaviors among people who are cyberbullied. Now, it is not the case that cyberbullying causes suicides. Rather, it's part of a constellation of problems that can increase or add to the likelihood. And I want to give you some statistics about that in a moment. So how do you prevent cyberbullying? And this is going to get into this question about how you can reach out to social media sites about getting content removed. So we're going to address this in two different ways. The best thing to do about cyberbullying is to prevent it. So we're going to start by what we can do to prevent cyberbullying, and then we're going to go into how you can react if somebody is being cyberbullied. So there's kind of a constellation of three things that we're going to work on to prevent cyberbullying. We're going to work on instructional approaches, and this is number one. We need to make sure that our children understand what online safety is and that they can control their own emotions and behaviors. So instead of reacting to things that happen to them online, they're responding. They're responding using their full thoughts so that they can practice the online safety that you've instructed them about. And also, that you have been instructional about expecting them to engage in upstander behaviors. So what does that really look like? Well, we want our children, anytime that they're in that online environment, to be asking different questions about what they're seeing and what they're being asked. So the first question that we want them to ask, and that we want you to teach your children, is the difference between private information and public information. So is the information that they are being asked to provide somebody online, is that information private? Is the information that they're seeing somebody else post about somebody else, is that information private? Are they asking that questions, and are they taking the time to process what they're experiencing because they're self-regulated and because they know the difference between reacting and responding? Also, we want everybody online to ask the question, is this respectful? Am I treating the other person as another human, or am I degrading them in some way? Is what's being done to me respectful, or is it degrading in some way? And am I regulated enough to actually process that information and respond instead of react? You know, it's really important that our children understand what our values are, whether they come from our culture, whether or not they come from our faith, whether or not they're simply part of what it means to be a member of your household. Helping our children understand what our household values are is really important to preventing cyberbullying, because what we want to do then is make sure that when they're self-regulated, that they ask the question of things that they themselves are posting or things that they're seeing other people post. And they ask that, does this behavior match my family's values? And finally, do I need to stand up for that person? This is a simple question, and the upstanding behavior that we're looking for in cyberbullying is fairly straightforward. We're asking for people who witness cyberbullying not to share it, to stop it where it is, so they don't forward it, not even to forward it to say, that isn't this harmful, but to stop it where it is and to tell a trusted adult that they witnessed it. Okay. We've created a little video through the state of Arizona and Must Stop Bullying to show exactly how easy it can be to be an upstander, while recognizing that for many of us, we find that upstanding behavior to be a little bit frightening. So let's take a look at this.
You see kids bullied online every day and want to stop it, but how? Almost hacked into the mainframe. This ends now.
No, you don't have to be a computer hacker to stop cyberbullying. Your words are influential enough to make a difference.
Not cool. Delete this.
Okay, so thank you for letting me know that you can't hear the audio. Let me see if I can do that again.
You see kids bullied online every day and want to stop it. But how?
Almost hacked into the mainframe. This ends now.
No, you don't have to be a computer hacker to stop cyberbullying. Your words are influential enough to make a difference.
Not cool. Delete this.
Standing up to bullying isn't as hard as you think. Visit muststopbullying.org to learn how.
You know, in a very real way, the adage, if a tree fell in the forest and nobody was there to hear it, would it make a sound, is very much what the science is telling us we need to be looking for to prevent and stop cyberbullying. If somebody says something mean about somebody online and nobody read it, and those who did read it didn't believe it and didn't care, would there be cyberbullying? And what the experts and the scientists are saying is no. No, this is how we're going to stop it, by making sure that people who see it disregard it. But, and this goes to some of the questions that I'm getting in the chat and in the Q&A, there are physical things that we can do to protect our students from cyberbullying. Physical things that involve the privacy and screen time settings on the smartphones, the account settings on Macs and PCs, and the browser settings. Now, any one of these you can Google for very specific instructions, but I wanted to assure you that there are privacy and procedures in place on each of these devices that you can access, and I'm going to just give you the very first couple of steps that you can take to begin to set those in place. For example, on smartphones and smartphones and tablets, if you have an Android and that's running your smartphone or your tablet, the Android operating system, the Family Link app is an app that Google developed that can control the kind of sites and the kind of content that your children are exposed to, as well as how often and how long they get to use these devices. So that can be downloaded and installed right away. It doesn't cost you any money. And this is kind of my point here. There are a lot of fancy applications out there that claim to protect children from cyberbullying. And I've looked at and evaluated a lot of them. And what I can tell you is that what's free and resident in your devices gets you about 90% of the way there, if not all the way there. If you're using an Apple device, an iOS device, you go under settings and under screen time and then under family. And there you can set a bunch of settings for your child's device that includes the kind of language that gets filtered from them, the sites that they're allowed to go to, how long they're able to spend on those sites, and again, the type of content that they can access on a YouTube or a Netflix, all of that. Macs and PCs, if you're wondering, well, how do I do a similar setting on my Mac and PC? The first thing that you need to do is make sure that your child isn't using your account on PCs and Macs, so a Windows machine or a Macintosh. You're allowed to set multiple accounts and password protect them. When you set up a second account on your computer, you can tell Windows or the iOS operating system on a Mac who is using it and set controls for the type of language that they are allowed to be exposed to, the kind of websites that they're allowed to go to, what they are allowed to share and socialize online, and how much time they're allowed to spend. And all of that is resident on your machines and on your devices. So you don't have to buy anything special for that. Also, all the browsers, all of the major browsers, and there's many, too many for me to explain all of them here, but each of the major browsers that you're probably using, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, all of these have built in them settings to prevent users from accessing certain information and to filter out certain words, contents, and phrases. So you can access, for example, on Chrome, you go under Preferences and Privacy, and you can tell Chrome who is going to be using it and how Chrome knows and what sort of content you want to watch. But all of that is secondary to what we need to do on a very personal level with our children in order to prevent cyberbullying. You see, and we're going to get into the warning signs of cyberbullying in just a moment, but for us to be able to monitor our children's behaviors in cyberspace, and for us to notice the changes in their behaviors that might occur if they're being cyberbullied or they're experiencing things that really causes dissonance in them, we need to be present to them. We need to actually know what they're doing. None of the different physical barriers that I described are a substitute for sitting down with your child and seeing what they're doing, asking them to walk you through what it's like to play Fortnite, what it's like to go on Roblox. Ask them to show you what it's like to be in their digital classroom, to see. And for us to set up in our homes an environment where all of our digital behaviors are public and that all of us are allowing the other people in our household to come and go from those experiences. So you yourself have to begin to model appropriate boundaries and appropriate online behaviors. Are you secretive with what you're doing online? Or are you online in a way that is open and people can see what you're doing? Do you keep strong boundaries when you're dealing online? Or do you feel that you have a lot of personal information out there that people are consuming and reacting to in ways that bother you, that cause you stress and anxiety? Because our children model our behaviors and our reactions more than they do what we tell them to do. They follow what we actually are doing. And finally, and most importantly, we have to have strong in-person relationships before we can have strong online relationships. The kind of online coercion that happens, if your child knows that the kind of questions and the kind of behaviors, the kind of threats, and again, as I mentioned, the kind of coercion that can happen in a cyberbullying experience, if they know that those types of interactions are not present in healthy relationships, then they will not tolerate them in cyber relationships. So are you showing your children the kind of respect, the regard, that the non-coercive behavior that we want from a successful in-person relationship? So all of those together create kind of the personal barrier to prevent cyberbullying. And they're just as important as anything that we teach our children or any physical barriers that we put in place. I do want to address kind of the warning signs of bullying and cyberbullying in particular for a moment. Cyberbullying can cause dichotomous behavior when it comes to the devices themselves. So in some cases, you see that if cyberbullying is happening, you see the victim unable to detach himself or herself from the device. They're constantly checking it, and they're checking it in an obsessive way, and also in that secretive way, that secrecy around our digital behaviors that we don't want in our households. So that might be a warning sign. But at the same time, we find that some of our children will withdraw from their digital worlds entirely when they're being cyberbullied. So you had a child that used to go online and play games or text or use Instagram, and all of a sudden they're not using any of their devices. So an overuse of the device or a use pattern where they're avoiding it, both are indications that something has happened in their digital world and they're reacting to whatever it was that happened. So either they're constantly monitoring it to see what else is going to be said or done or how it's going to spread, or they're too afraid of it and they just avoid it altogether. Look, we use the term somatic illness, and the roots of that have to do with the fact that these are illnesses that are born out of the mind. And what we are now learning from really good new neuroscientific research is that our bodies are actually experiencing this in a very real and a very painful way. That when we experience these high levels of anxiety because we're being cyberbullied, because we're being threatened, that our body does actually react. And it creates an inflammation response, for example, through the triggering of the sympathetic nervous system that can create real physical pain. Now, in the COVID-19 world, that pain might be more generalized. During a school year, kids who are being bullied or cyberbullying, their somatic illnesses are all going to occur at or near school time. So before school or in that Sunday, as they're thinking about going back to school on Monday. Again, and so much of what we know about bullying is everything that happened before COVID-19, but because virtually every incident of cyberbullying is tied to in-person bullying, and because 98% of bullying occurs on or near school grounds, you see in victims of cyberbullying a sharp change in attitude towards school. So kids that used to love to go to school now find themselves avoiding it, avoiding schoolwork, saying that they don't like it, making derogatory comments about it, all because of the cyberbullying that's happening to them. So, and this gets into some of the questions that we have here in the Q&A and the chat. How should you respond? Well, the first thing that we want to do is ask your child what should be done. And I know that this is kind of the last thing that some of us want to do as parents and people that care about kids. We want to launch into a vigorous defense of our child. We want to call out the cavalry to help them. But too often, our children tell us, and this is especially true for older kids, that they're afraid to bring us information because of our reaction, because we might do something that makes the situation worse. Moreover, we know that our children often know what to do in response to cyberbullying, but they need the guidance and they need the assurance to do it. And so they don't actually want us to solve it. They want the support of a caring adult so that they can start to do those things that will make the cyberbullying better or go away. So we start by asking them what they think should be done. They might not have the right idea, and we don't have to do what they suggest. But starting that discussion by asking them will help assuage their fears that we are going to jump in and make the situation worse. But it also shows them that we're really paying attention to what they're feeling. And if you participated in my last webinar, this is a great time to use that active listening that we talked about. Active listening is when you set aside all distractions and focus on what that person is saying. So you don't have your phone there, you don't have an appointment coming up, you've given a scheduled amount of time to the discussion. You listen to them by making eye contact, you repeat back to them what they've said to you. This shows them that you've been listening. You help them identify the emotions that are present in that discussion, because having a language for the emotions that we're feeling is the first thing we need to establish in order to be able to control those emotions. And finally, you acknowledge the fact that they are sharing with you, and you compliment the speaker for being the willingness to share that information. The next thing that we need to do, if it's really a case of cyberbullying, and this is tricky, and we're going to jump around a little bit with this one here, but we do need to save the offending material. Now, happily, many of the social media sites that our children use have a feature built into them such that you actually engage the provider through the offending material. So for example, and we're going to talk about Snapchat here in just a minute, but Snapchat, if you find something inappropriate on Snapchat, you use the inappropriate post to start the discussion with Snapchat, the corporation. So they are going to document it and save it for you. But you don't want to destroy the information. At the same time, you don't want it to be front and center of your child's digital world. So keep copies, but keep it away from your child. And this is a very fine line. We've gone back and forth in law enforcement with this. We started out in the very first instances of cyberbullying, telling everybody to delete every negative post. And then law enforcement came back and said, no, you need to save every post. But then we were saving them in our own profiles. So, you know, if something mean was posted about us, every time we open up our page, we see that thing. So now, happily, the providers have come up with different ways where it can be recorded, but we don't have to confront it every time we use that device. And this goes into it. Right now, report it right away to the service. So if your child is being cyberbullied, so something has been posted about them that's embarrassing or inappropriate, something that's been posted about them that is threatening, something that has somebody is impersonating them, somebody is asking personal information about them that's inappropriate for sharing, or somebody is directing other people to private information about your child, you can report that. And every one of the major social services has on their website or in the app itself the instructions for doing that. And like I said, they've made great strides. I mentioned that I was reviewing Snapchat's materials in preparation for our call, and they really do a very, very good job. You simply select the snap or the chat that was offensive, and there is the other icons, so you can access other features or services, and right in that is the ability to report that to Snapchat. But the next thing you want to do is report it to the school. Again, the science of bullying tells us that almost all cyberbullying is traced back to in-school bullying, and your schools have, by law, policies and procedures in place to respond to bullying. So if you see cyberbullying, it's all but guaranteed that there has been in-person bullying that's happened in the past. Sometimes the cyberbullying is the proof of the in-person bullying that's happened before because you have a document of it, as opposed to the he said, she said that might have occurred before. So make sure that you report it back to the school. By the way, for you that care, the state of Arizona's bullying laws, again, as I mentioned, they mandate that your school has a bullying response plan. That does include cyberbullying. It mandates that schools contact the parents of bullies and victims when bullying occurs. It also mandates that all parents are made aware of those schools' bullying policies and procedures. So they should expect that, and especially if you have a documented case of it. And again, it might help them to address an in-person situation that they've been aware of but didn't have proof of. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to report the cyberbullying to your parent network. And that's harder for some of us that might not know as many parents at our school as we would like, but chances are somebody in your friend circle is connected there. And if the cyberbullying is happening, again, because all cyberbullying is linked to at-school in-person bullying, there's somebody in your child's school community that's responsible for the cyberbullying. More importantly, there are other people who maybe while they didn't post it, they shared it, they laughed at it, they commented on it. In other words, they weren't being or intervening as an upstander. And while it's the case that it's hard for us to change the behaviors of in-person and cyber bullies, it is not that hard for school, for us to change the behaviors of bystanders, those people who are neither the victim nor the bullying. Those people are the ones that have, according to the science, stronger relationships with the caring adults in their life, stronger relationships with their parents. They're the ones who you can talk to, and you can talk to their parents and get them to intervene and be those upstanders. And so even when the cyberbullying is occurring outside of the school time, I'm still recommending that you tell the school about it. Again, in case it is evidence of what is happening at school, or it also alerts your school. And I know that we're in a COVID-19 environment and our kids aren't going back to school, but they will eventually. And when they go back, our schools want to know about the potential interpersonal problems that are happening between students. But this is what makes contacting the parents of in your circle about cyberbullying, because again, by the science, if your child is being cyberbullied, they're being cyberbullied by someone that they know, and it's because of relationships and issues that started in person at the school. So one of the people in your child's extended social group from the school knows about it or is involved in it, and it's those parents, the parents of those people, that you want to engage. There is an instance when we need to go beyond reporting to the school and reporting to other parents. And in Maricopa County, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office wants you to contact law enforcement when threats of physical harm are made, when the cyberbullying posts themselves depict actual crimes. So this might involve, by the way, cyberbullying where somebody posts a video and you notice that that video was taken through a window into your child's room, that extreme kind of invasion of privacy. All of that kind of invasion of privacy is a crime. So if the cyberbullying, the posts include a crime or a description of a crime, that gets reported to law enforcement. And obviously any nude photos of children get reported immediately to law enforcement. So that is, in a very quick 45 minutes, now going on 50 minutes here, that's what we know about cyberbullying. It remains very frustrating, but I go back to my earlier point, which is that if nobody is reacting to the posts and nobody is sharing it, the cyberbullying will go away. If we all learn to treat each other with more respect and regard in our in-person relationships, then the cyberbullying will go away. Any questions that I haven't addressed so far in this process? Anything you'd like me to elaborate on?
Brad, sort of while we're waiting to see if folks have additional questions, something that did come up in speaking to parents with regard to cyberbullying and sort of in the conversations around why they really felt like this was an important presentation and to bring you back in to speak to our community was, during this COVID-19 pandemic where, our kids are on their devices so much more than they've ever probably been, right? And we're having to kind of recreate in our own minds, like what the allowances are for that. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts or tips or tools around how to maybe sort of try to wean them off, as we try to transition back into hopefully some sort of normalcy? It's almost like you can kind of see, or at least I can see, like the brain chemistry start to change in my 8-year-olds, where I'm sort of like, it's a little unnerving, trying to find that balance and also trying to kind of, again, get them off the devices, off the gaming, outside in the pool, that sort of thing. Do you have some just, kind of tips or tricks about how to maybe help those kids come out of this time into the transition out of it?
Sure. So first of all, it's incredibly difficult. So you know, if your home had screen time limits like my house had, we've had to kind of adjust those because now we have screen time that's being mandated by the school. And now, and so that the screen times, and then the school day isn't corresponding with our work day the way, so a class ends early, we're currently in a webinar for our work, it gets to be very, very difficult. So I recommend, and this goes back to some very solid parenting research, as close as you can come to creating a schedule for your household, one that actually limits the screen time and compartmentalizes it into chunks. And you post that schedule and you actually can involve your child in creating it. How much screen time do you think you want? How much time do you want for playing games? And create that schedule and then make it objective. So you're not just running with a clock that you're running in your head, but it's posted so that you can say, hey, this is now outdoor time, or this is education time, or this is book time. And children are still going to complain, but now with it posted, you can say, hey, it's posted. We all agreed to it. Oftentimes you can turn that into a contract where you all sign it. So there's a quid pro quo. You want 2 hours? I think you should only have an hour. All right, we'll agree on an hour and a half. Can we all agree on that? Okay, we're going to all sign this. And so when the behavior doesn't conform to that, you can say, whoa, it's not me. We all agreed to this. You signed it. You got extra time because you said you could live by that. That's a very different way of approaching our time in COVID-19 than chasing our kids around and saying, hey, you're spending are you on too much time? Mom, I'm in the middle of a game. Well, when does the game end? Well, if you've got a schedule, the game ends at the time that's on the schedule. And again, that's easier said than done. I recognize it. We start every day off at my household with a printed schedule, and we follow it. You know, sometimes we even get through breakfast staying on schedule, but we do find that it really helps us. I want to talk about a couple of cases that are being raised here. So first of all, for anybody who has tried to work with a school to prevent bullying and the bullying didn't stop, I apologize. And I feel really, and I sympathize, because it's so very, very difficult to bring it up to a school and then for nothing to happen is kind of adding insult to injury. I suspect that the school wasn't following a evidence-based bullying prevention program. We actually have a whole other webinar that Tom and I are doing on evidence-based bullying prevention programs and what they should do. But under no circumstances should the bullying get worse after a proper intervention. What that tells me is that that your child was in a situation at whatever school that was, at whatever point in time that it was, where the students in that student body were not properly motivated to create a school where bullying didn't occur. You know, in evidence-based bullying prevention, we recognize by the science that it's hard to change the behavior of the bully if you don't change the behavior of the bystanders. So for bullying to continue at a school, it means that the bystanders have to allow it to happen. And if they're allowing it to happen, it's because the school hasn't properly informed them about what their responsibilities are as a student at that school, and because parents haven't been properly involved to help those bystanders' children understand their roles and responsibilities and their own family values. So I apologize that. I would say that we are very open to working with individual schools. If you've worked with them and they're having trouble or they're struggling to implement an evidence-based program, I will share my contact information with you at the end, and we can work directly with schools to make sure that happens. Okay, I want to read this other comment here. Right, so so this was a very, very interesting comment about not shaming bullies. So the first thing I can tell you is that evidence-based bullying programs, so this is Olveus Bullying Prevention Program, or Second Step, or even PBIS, because it is an evidence-based bullying prevention program properly implemented. None of those programs focus on the bully. They work with bullies as part of a larger program, but their focus is on creating a climate where the bullying behaviors aren't rewarded. And again, this goes back to my cyberbullying tree in the woods analogy. If a bully attempts to coerce, to harm, to manipulate somebody, and the bystanders say, hey, we don't do that around here, that's not cool, that's not how you earn friends around here, then that's not going to happen. That's not calling the bullying out in a public way. We're not asking them to stand up in front of the class. We're not expelling them, but rather we're creating a culture that the people in that culture know the right way to treat each other. That's why the proper bully intervention is not punishment, but rather teaching the bully better relationship skills so that they can form friendships. And we're getting a little bit deep into this, and this is part of this is a much bigger webinar about evidence-based bullying prevention programs. But what a bully is doing is trying his or her best to win value in the eyes of his or her peers, using the skills that she or he has, skills that he or she learned in their earliest years at home. Sometimes those skills don't work in the actual classroom. And if they haven't learned positive relationship skills at home, they need to be taught them somewhere. And in bullying-free schools, those schools teach relationship skills. So I hope that answered some of those questions there. We've just got a couple more minutes.
So forgive me if you touched on this, but just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the part of the question that, sort of suggests, is reaching out to the parent of, your child's accused bully.
Right. The school is required by Arizona state law to reach out to the parents of the bully. Now, whether or not they will do that in a productive way, we can't control that, because Arizona law is kind of funny in this way, in that it tells the school that they must contact the parents of the bullies and the parents of the victims, but they don't prescribe how those contacts should be or what programs should be used when they do that. But in a good school, one that's using an evidence-based program, those conversations are scripted. So they have good material that those schools can use when they reach out to that kid and to the parents of the victim to let you know that that's happening. Do all schools follow it? No, but you can. I'm telling you, and I shared some of that with you, and I can bring up the statute, and you can write me, and I'll actually show you where the statute is. But it's in state law that they are supposed to reach out to the parents of the bully. Unfortunately, in many cases, and I don't want to overgeneralize here, but the science is also fairly clear that many of our victims are not coming from supportive environments. They do not have strong relationships with caring adults. So reaching out to their parents isn't going to stop the bullying behavior as much as, and this is what I'm advocating for with Arizona schools. Whenever I talk to school districts, I ask them to change their policies so that not only are parents of bullies and parents of victims contacted, but parents of bystanders are contacted as well. Think about the conversation that goes on in your home. If you get a call from a school that says, I just wanted to let you know today that John was bullied and your child saw that happening. That's a very different conversation than a call that goes home and says, just want to let you know today that your kid bullied someone, right? It's a very different discussion. And think about the families and the kids who would be contacted for being bystanders. What we know about them from very good scientific research is that they have stronger relationships with adults. So they're more likely to listen to those adults and to model those behaviors. So parents of bystanders can talk to their child who was a bystander and say, hey, do you know what people in our family do when we see somebody that gets hurt? What are we supposed to do when we see somebody that needs help? Oh, you don't know? Let's go over that. and you're going to have family examples of it, cultural examples, sometimes faith-based examples of exactly how you're supposed to behave in those incidents. How does that apply when a school determines it is not bullying, rather an issue of harassment? Okay, so the only difference between bullying and harassment, and again, we're getting into some of the science of in-person bullying here, is that a harasser doesn't intentionally cause the victim harm. That's the psychological difference. It's impossible for the school to know that, by the way. And so we've actually kind of dropped that. But if the school believes that it's harassment and they are trying to pull a definition on you, they're trying to say, no, it's not bullying, it's just harassment, then the school should be able to make it stop by confronting the harasser with the damage being caused to the victim. That is how you determine the difference between bullying and harassment. In a harassment situation, when you confront the harasser with the pain that's being caused, they change their behavior, because a harasser is not intentionally causing harm to a victim. They just have a different view about how that relationship is going. So you talk to a harasser, for example, and you say, you know, that name that you call Tom, Tom doesn't like it. It hurts Tom. And the harasser says, no, it doesn't. Like, Tom knows that I'm kidding. This is part of how we joke. This is part of our relationship. And when an adult sits down with a harasser and says, no, you actually are making them afraid, the harasser will change that behavior because it's not their intent. Their intent is to form a relationship with Tom. A bully is trying to form a relationship with everybody but Tom. And a bully is intentionally causing harm to Tom. That's how he knows that he or she is succeeding, is because of that harm. When you tell a bully about the harm they're causing the victim, you reward the bully. We've actually hooked up bullies to monitor their physiological reaction to the pain caused their victims, and they respond to it as pleasure and arousal. So that's the difference between harasser and bullying. And you can kind of call BS on the school for making that distinction. And if you need me to help you call BS to that school, I'm around, and I'm happy to do that too. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you listening to this today. I know that you've got a lot of other things you're doing to keep your home ship afloat. And thank you for everything that you're doing for our children. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Tom. Bye-bye, everybody.